this presentation, I will be exploring the different codes of conduct and organisations that have been set up in order to combat legal, ethical, and health and safety issues when conducting research. When looking at this topic, I found an article that Sicker et al. 2007 wrote, and in this article they discussed about legal issues surrounding network research. In this study, they implied that the term legal was laws that are designed to protect. That applies to everyone, and people who violate these laws can be prosecuted. In other terms, legal is simply working within the boundaries of the civil law, so what people are allowed and not allowed to do. On the other hand, defined by Beauchamp et al. 2001, ethics is a generic term for various ways of understanding and examining the moral life. So the moral principles that govern a person's behaviour, so what they believe to be right and wrong. A person's morals decide what actions they display in everyday life. In addition, health and safety are organised efforts and procedures for identifying workplace hazards and reducing accidents and exposure to harmful situations and substances. Health and safety procedures protect all participants from getting injured during the experiment, and also the person conducting this experiment as well. The Health and Safety Executive of 1999 is put in place to protect the researcher, establishment, and the participant. Prior to 1947, there were no accepted codes of conduct for human experimentation. There were no consequences for objectifying humans and torturing them in experiments for selfish reasons. Therefore, this can be seen by the German political party, the Nazis, in World War II, as they imprisoned many people and held them captive in concentration camps. They experimented on these people in order to gain advantages and benefits in certain areas of research without risking the lives of their own soldiers. The people were treated with very little care and consideration. They were forced to take part in these experiments. They were treated as subjects and not humans. For instance, they submersed people into water tanks at different temperatures to see how long they could survive in these temperatures before they lost consciousness or died. Also, they used people to test the lack of oxygen someone could withstand at altitude. These experiments geared towards helping the German pilots if they were in a situation where altitude was too high or they had to eject themselves from their planes and land in the waters. Due to the horrors that had happened in World War II, the Nuremberg trials took place in 1947. They looked very closely at what the Nazis had done to people in World War II. Then 2 summits were organised to set legal and ethical precedents in order to avoid the harm caused to people in experiments during World War II. The first was the Nuremberg Code in 1947. These were 10 points that all researchers must consider and take seriously in order to use humans within experiments. Firstly, the participants must give their consent, so informed consent, to take part in the experiment. They must know the purpose, nature, and duration of the experiment prior to taking part. Within this, they have the right to withdraw from the experiment at any time. The second point explained that there had to be a purpose to the experiment and the research. You can't conduct an experiment unless you explain why you are doing that specific study. Thirdly, the code stated that complicated experiments shouldn't be tested on humans unless tested on animals before, and from testing on the animals could predict and anticipate the outcome of the experiment if they were to conduct it on humans. The fourth point stated that the experiment that is conducted should not cause any physical or mental harm to the participants that are taking part. The next point said that an experiment can't be conducted if death or injury can occur. Following on from this, the next point stated that if the risk of the experiment is too high or of harming the participant, then the experiment should not take place. The seventh point explained that the people that are conducting the experiments need to have significant preparation before the experiments happen. They need to know the protocol of their tests and what equipment is needed in order to carry out the experiment. In addition to this, the next point declares that the person conducting the research must have a qualification in the field that they are studying in before an experiment can be carried out. Linking back to point 1, the ninth point similarly says that the participant has the right to withdraw at any time throughout the experiment. It is a voluntary process. They don't have to be part of an experiment if they don't want to. And finally, the last point explains that the researcher must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage. The second organisation that was set up was the Declaration of Helsinki, the World Medical Association. This came about in 1964. It identifies the legal and ethical principles that should be thought about before or during conducting research. It states that it's the duty of the researcher or doctor to have the participant or patient's health as their first consideration. They have a duty of care to them, and no physical or psychological harm should come to the participants or patients. There must be a primary purpose to the experiment, and the protocol and equipment should be checked before experimentation takes place. The people that take part in the medical research must be volunteers, who must give their informed consent before participating in the experiment. In connection to this, the participant has the right to withdraw at any time from the medical research, and the researcher must allow this to happen. The person conducting the test cannot be deceitful. They have to give all details about the experiment to the participant. If the protocol of the experiment changes slightly, then the participants must be informed before the experiment. The researchers have to keep all participants' results to themselves or locked away as part of the Data Protection Act. BASES is the British Association of Sport and Exercise Science. According to Adams et al. 2010, the Code of Conduct outlines ethical and legal issues that are essential to safe research within sport and exercise sciences. It protects the researcher and the participant in the experiment, making sure that all areas of the experiment have a purpose and are safe to conduct. For a sports scientist to have a BASES accreditation aids their career, as it boosts your status as a researcher. An accredited BASES sports scientist means that you are trustworthy when conducting studies, and the points that you discover are valid. The experiments that you conduct have a purpose, and you are recognised as being honest and reliable. You have a qualification in your field of work and a high degree of competence in the area that you are researching in. The elements of the BASES Code of Conduct include ethical clearance, informed consent, and confidentiality through the Data Protection Act, which I will explain in more detail later in the presentation.